here to break down the latest on the plane shoot down and the U.S. perhaps sending advisors to the Ukraine. LIGNET analyst, former CIA analyst Lisa Ruth. Lisa, welcome back.
Good to be here.
So, what type of support is America offering in this situation?
So far, it's still unclear. We don't really know, but I think it's more of a message. I think if you look at what Obama has been really slammed for, in the U.S. as a whole, is not doing anything. And I think this message is, okay, we're doing something. We are going to send people in. I think the first thing is going to be to try to secure the crash site, although frankly, I don't know what else we really need to learn from that. But I really think the important point is the message here.
Well, a message coming in terms of where this country pays for priorities with its pocketbook. President Obama revealing earlier this week he approved a plan to send $5 million in body armor, night vision goggles, and communications equipment to the Ukrainians. Will this be broadened to include some arms for the Ukrainians?
I think it could be, and the question is if we'll know about it. You know, if we look at the Syrian situation, for example, it started with MREs and backing, and then it turned out later to be weapons. I don't think it's out of the question for Ukraine, but again, Ukraine has weapons. The issue so far has been they've asked for training. They want support. There could be more weapons. We are not going to see boots on the ground, I'll tell you that much.
Well, some have likened this to a return to the Cold War, or Cold War, the sequel. Is that just a little too facile an explanation? Are we going to see an icing over of relations between the U.S. and the Soviet Union?
I think we've already seen some of that with Russia. And certainly, I have a friend who's a Russian expert who said, you have to remember what Putin is playing is not chess, he's playing poker. And he knows very well what's in his hand, but more importantly, he knows very well what's in Obama's hand. And what I do think we're going to see is continuation of the sanctions. I think we're going to see continuation of rhetoric. But when it really comes down to it, and JD, you and I have talked about this, we need Russia for things like Syria, Iraq, Iran, a lot of those things. How far are we really going to be willing to go to jeopardize those positions?
Not to mention hitching rides to the International Space Station, since we've scuttled our ability to put our own astronauts into space.
Absolutely.
This almost sounds like a question for an exam, Lisa. Compare and contrast this situation with the so-called proxy wars of the Cold War era.
Again, similar. Certainly when you're looking at Russia, I think one of the issues is what Russia wants. And that's some of what we don't even really know, although we can start to extrapolate. And it does go back to the same idea of the proxy wars. If you remember back when this started with Ukraine, Russia wanted to keep Ukraine in its sphere of influence. That was a lot of what was happening with the proxy wars. They wanted to maintain their areas of control. I think that is what we're seeing. I don't think Putin wants to take over all of eastern Ukraine. It would be very difficult. Russians are a minority there. But he is sending a real clear message, and he is not backing down. He's remaining defiant and saying, we don't want you guys to go to the West.
Geopolitical implications abound, especially in the shoot down of the jetliner from Malaysia. Russia continues to deny any fault for this plane crash. In fact, a statement from Russia's deputy defense minister says the United States has no proof to back up accusations. Here's Anatoly Antonov. He says it was declared that the data collected by U.S. technical intelligence and the satellite photographs prove that the rocket was launched from the territory controlled by the rebels. Where is this data? Why is it not presented to the public? Are they, so to say, still making it? Now, it's been interesting, Lisa. Yesterday, the press accounts were that there's no evidence of direct involvement. But we just had Senator Rubio on that pre-recorded interview. He's on the Senate Intelligence Committee. He says in his mind there is a direct link between the Russians and the shoot down of this airliner.
Absolutely. And it depends on what you want to call direct. There's no question Russia is arming them. There's no question Russia is training them. There's no question that Russian special forces are parts of the separatists. Did Putin sneak across the border and push the button? No, but it depends on where you want to look. You mentioned the geopolitical implications. fascinating looking at the press around the world on this. China's coverage very clearly has said the United States has no proof. This is the Ukrainians' fault because they're allowing war there. Look at what Brazil says. Brazil is saying, not Russia's fault. Ukraine needs to get control of its territory. South Africa, India. So you look geopolitically, the West is kind of standing on its own here.
Well, now this is a very interesting development, and it shows the value. At times we often talk about human intelligence assets abroad, but there is something to be said for the analyst and the internet, and the analyst and you, Lisa Ruth, hard at work from right here in the studio taking a look at what's going on. So you are saying, in terms of public opinion, even the so-called non-aligned nations, Brazil, South Africa, etc., tend to be siding with the Russian version of events?
So far, that's what we're seeing. And then let's take it a step further. Right now, Putin's popularity rating, now before the crash, 83%. This is despite the fact that sanctions are having an effect. You know, the economy is hurting a little bit, but he's getting a lot of praise. So it is kind of fascinating to look at that and how it's playing out.
What is the appeal? There was one press account that referred to Putin as Russia's bare-chested Reagan. Is it the macho nature? Is it just such a contrast now with our president and his style of leadership?
I think it's a bunch of different things. If you look at Russia as a culture, and historically, they value strength. There's no question about it. Reformers in this country, when the wall fell down over there, you look at Gorbachev as a great guy. Russia, not so much. They saw him as weak. They saw him as taking away their pensions. They saw him as hurting them geopolitically. The strong man in Russia is always revered. That's who gets the attention. I do think there's something to, whether you're pro-Obama or not, he's a thoughtful guy. He's much more quiet. He's not out there bare-chested riding horses. It is quite a contrast.
Well, and it's interesting, and to give his supporters their due, you think back to the 2008 campaign, President Obama, then Senator Obama, was compared favorably with Star Trek's Mr. Spock, being non-emotional, being a very cool customer. But that different style in leadership, for whatever reason, seems to be redounding to the benefit of Mr. Putin and the Russians, despite this shooting down of a jetliner with almost 300 killed, for goodness sakes. Now, another thing you brought up in passing that I don't want to pass up on, and this is what we called in the old days of the Cold War the Sino-Soviet relationship, always searching for alliteration. Nowadays it translates Chinese-Russian relationship. That has been renewed and strengthened.
Absolutely. They recently signed this enormous energy bill. And when we're talking about sanctions, China is giving Russia a great escape valve, as are the BRICS for that matter. They can sell to Brazil, India, etc. There's no question the Chinese are aligning with Russia, again, both on the crash issue, on the separatist issue, and economically.
45 years ago, we saw a border clash between communist China and the Soviet Union. But in the passage of time and allied economic interests, we have a very different picture today with what's going on. President Putin, his popularity, the Russian love of a strong man, does this popularity continue to grow or to be managed successfully in the Russian Federation?
Well, there is trouble brewing here. The business people are not happy. And if the next set of sanctions comes down from the EU, if they manage to get a cohesive, coherent plan together, which is debatable, but businesses in Russia are starting to say, wait a minute, we can't keep doing this. We need some relief here. It will depend on how far this goes. But, look at Iran. The sanctions certainly didn't cause regime change there.
Well, as always, a sobering analysis with our daily intelligence brief. Lisa Ruth, we thank you very much for your insights, and we look forward to our next visit.
I appreciate it.
And just a reminder, for in-depth analysis and forecasting, not only on the plane crash investigation, but on so many other topics dealing with our relationship with powers overseas, you need to go to LIGNET.com. Stay with us. The crisis in the Middle East, trouble around the globe, or globe, as it may be, not enough to deter our president from his fundraising. Our man in Washington, Newsmax John Gizzi, with his take a little bit later in our program. But when we come back, a news update. And as always, our long-standing invitation. If you've got a comment on the news we cover, why don't you tweet us your remarks at Newsmax TV, #America's Forum. Our program continues following this timeout.